My name is Corinne, and at 35, I was decorating my 7-year-old daughter Emma's birthday cake when my sister Megan called from O'Hare Airport. She's a pilot for American Airlines, and her voice carried that professional calm that made my stomach drop. Corinne, I saw Ryan on my flight manifest to Paris, she said. I actually laughed, thinking my husband was planning a surprise. Then she added 5 words that shattered my world. He wasn't alone business class with a brunette seats 2A and 2B. Before I share what happened next, tell me where you're watching from. Hit subscribe if you've ever felt your world collapse with just one phone call, and stay with me as I reveal how a simple flight manifest exposed a betrayal that destroyed everything I thought was real. That October morning started like every morning in our Chicago penthouse for the past 10 years. Ryan stood at our marble kitchen island making his famous chocolate chip pancakes for Emma, while I sipped Colombian coffee and watched Lake Michigan shimmer 23 floors below. The morning sun painted our living room gold, highlighting the family photos covering every surface: 10 years of marriage, 7 years of parenthood, a lifetime of memories I thought were honest. Emma sat at the breakfast bar in her unicorn pajamas, her dark curls messy from sleep, drawing something with the concentration only 7-year-olds possess. "Daddy, look," she announced, holding up her creation. "It's my birthday invitation for tomorrow." "You're coming to my party, right?" Ryan kissed the top of her head, leaving a small flower handprint in her hair. "Wouldn't miss it for the world, princess." "Daddy has to go to New York today for boring lawyer stuff, but I'll be back tonight with the biggest present ever." New York. He'd mentioned this trip 3 times this week, a merger between 2 pharmaceutical giants that required the senior partner's presence. His Armani suit hung on the bedroom door, the navy one I'd helped him pick for important presentations. His leather briefcase sat packed by the entrance, legal documents presumably inside. Everything looked exactly as it should for a successful attorney heading to Manhattan for a day of high-stakes negotiations. The coffee tasted particularly good that morning, or maybe I just remember it that way because it was the last morning of my old life. Ryan and I moved through our routine with the precision of a decade's practice. He checked his phone while eating, I reviewed my presentations for the creative director meeting, Emma chattered about her birthday party tomorrow, which friend would sit where, what games they'd play, whether the magician I'd hired could really pull rabbits from hats. Looking back now, the signs were everywhere, scattered like breadcrumbs through the past few months. Ryan had joined a gym in January, suddenly concerned about his approaching 40th birthday. The soft edges I'd found endearing had transformed into sharp angles and defined muscles. He'd replaced his entire wardrobe, goodbye comfortable khakis, hello designer jeans that cost more than most people's rent. New cologne too, something French and expensive that replaced the polo sport he'd worn since college. The late nights at the office had increased dramatically since summer. Major acquisition, he'd explained, collapsing into bed at 2 a.m., too exhausted to do more than kiss my forehead before falling asleep. Weekends meant more work, client dinners that spouses weren't invited to, golf games with potential investors that somehow lasted 8 hours. But this was the price of partnership at Brennan Hayes and Associates, Chicago's most prestigious international law firm. I understood ambition. My own advertising agency hadn't become successful without sacrifice. He'd bought a new phone in September, claiming his old one had processing issues. The old phone went to Emma for games or so, he said. I'd found it odd that he needed the latest iPhone for work calls and emails, but technology moved fast in corporate law. He'd also passworded his devices, something about client confidentiality and new firm policies after a data breach. I hadn't questioned it because trust was the foundation of marriage, wasn't it? Ryan kissed me goodbye that morning with the same lips that had promised fidelity 10 years ago. His cologne lingered in the elevator down to his Tesla, the one he'd bought himself for making senior partner. I watched from our window as he pulled into Chicago traffic, heading to what I believed was O'Hare's domestic terminal. Emma waved from beside me, her small hand leaving prints on the glass I'd normally clean immediately, but would later preserve for weeks, evidence that happiness had lived here once. The call from Megan came at 4:37 p.m. I remember because I was checking the timer for Emma's birthday cake, a 3-tier princess castle that had taken 2 days to plan. Megan flew international routes, mostly European destinations, and her schedule meant we often went weeks without talking. But her voice that afternoon was different, tight, with something I couldn't identify until later as dread. "Are you sitting down?" she asked, and I laughed because people only said that in movies. "I'm decorating Emma's cake," I said, adding another fondant rose to the castle tower. "Why would I need to sit down?" There was a pause, the kind that stretches time into impossible lengths. "Corinne, I just saw Ryan's name on my flight manifest. American Airlines, Flight 42 to Paris. He boarded 20 minutes ago." My first thought was that she was mistaken. Ryan was going to New York, not Paris. The merger was in Manhattan, not France. But Megan continued her words careful and precise, like she was reading from a manual on destroying someone's life. I walked past his gate to check because I couldn't believe it. He was there, Corinne. Business class seats, 2A and 2B. He was with a woman, brunette, maybe 30, definitely not a colleague relationship. They were sharing champagne at the gate, and she had her hand on his thigh. The piping bag in my hand squeezed involuntarily, sending pink frosting across the granite counter like abstract art made of sugar and shock. "You're sure it was Ryan?" I heard myself ask, though even then I knew Megan wouldn't call unless she was certain. We'd been sisters for 35 and 31 years, respectively. She knew what this information would do, and she wouldn't deliver it without absolute certainty. "I took a photo," she said quietly. "I'm sending it now." My phone buzzed against the counter, and there it was in high definition. Ryan in his casual travel outfit, the one I'd bought him last Christmas, Lululemon athletic wear, that cost $400 and made him look like a successful man pretending to be relaxed. Beside him sat a woman I recognized from firm events, Isabelle Moreau, the French attorney who'd transferred from the Paris office 4 months ago. She was laughing at something on his phone, her hand indeed on his thigh, her body turned toward his, with the kind of intimacy that doesn't develop during client meetings. The detective work began before I'd even decided to become a detective. My laptop sat on the kitchen counter where I'd been reviewing birthday party logistics, but now it became a portal into deception. Ryan's email was synced to our shared iPad, the one we used for Emma's bedtime stories and Netflix. He'd forgotten that detail in his careful construction of lies, or maybe he'd thought I'd never look because good wives trust their husbands. The Four Seasons. George V reservation appeared in his trash folder, deleted but not permanently erased. 5 nights in the penthouse suite. €8,000 breakfast included champagne on arrival, late checkout approved. The name on the reservation wasn't Ryan Matthews. It was Ryan Harrison, his mother's maiden name, the one he'd used in college when he didn't want his father tracking his credit cards. Mr. and Mrs. Harrison, the email confirmed, celebrating a special occasion. My hands moved across the keyboard with efficiency that surprised me, screenshots saving automatically to a folder I named Evidence. The credit card statements were next, a Visa I didn't know existed, opened 3 months ago with paperless statements sent to his work email. The charges read like a romance novel's research notes. Cartier, $8,000. La Perla Lingerie, $2,000. Dinner at Alinea, Chicago's most exclusive restaurant on a night I'd been at Emma's school play. Hotel charges at the Peninsula when he was supposedly at client dinners. The brunette had a name, Isabelle Moreau, and a digital footprint that told her story in careful posts and professional networking. Harvard Law Review Order of the Coif. Fluent in 4 languages, specializing in international mergers. Her LinkedIn showed the transfer from Paris to Chicago 4 months ago, brought over specifically to work on the pharmaceutical merger that had consumed Ryan's time. Her Facebook was mostly private, but her Instagram told different stories in carefully curated glimpses. There was Ryan at the company retreat in Wisconsin, standing just close enough to be noticed but not enough to raise questions. Ryan again at the firm's 4th of July party, the one I'd missed because Emma had strep throat. His hand rested on Isabelle's lower back in one photo, guiding her through the crowd with the kind of protective gesture I recognized from our early dating days. The comments from colleagues were telling. Power couple in the making, someone had written with a winking emoji. Harrison and Moreau sounds like a new firm, another had added. Her Instagram stories were still visible, 24-hour glimpses into a life I was beginning to understand intersected with mine in devastating ways. A photo of 2 champagne glasses at sunset with the caption, "Finally." A morning coffee shot from what looked like Ryan's Tesla's interior. A gift box from Cartier, with only heart emojis as explanation. Each image was dated, building a timeline that made me nauseous. This hadn't been sudden. It had been growing while I planned family dinners and signed Emma's permission slips and believed my marriage was solid. I called Ryan's phone, my voice steady as granite despite the earthquake inside. "Hi, honey," I said, the endearment tasting like ash. "How's New York?" The lie came so easily to him that I wondered how many times he'd done this before. "Exhausting," he said, and I could hear the airport bustle behind him. "These merger negotiations are brutal. Probably won't be home until late tomorrow." "Don't wait up. Tell me about the meeting," I pressed, needing to measure the depth of his deception. He launched into details about contract clauses and regulatory requirements, painting a picture of a Manhattan conference room while standing in an international terminal. The French accent that drifted past him became a Chinese investor in his story. The gate announcement for boarding became a call for room service at his hotel. Every word was another nail in our marriage's coffin, but I listened and made appropriate responses because I needed him to believe I believed. "Emma misses you," I said finally. "She's worried you'll miss her birthday." His pause was barely noticeable, but after 10 years, I could read his silences like sheet music. "I'll be there, princess," he said, though I wasn't sure if he meant Emma or was distracted by Isabelle. "Give her a kiss from Daddy. Tell her I'm bringing something special from New York." From New York. The lie was so specific, so unnecessary, that it felt like a taunt. After ending the call, I sat at our kitchen counter. The birthday cake half decorated the sunset, turning Lake Michigan into liquid gold, and made a decision that would either save or finish destroying my life. I was going to Paris. Not tomorrow, not next week, but right now, while the trail was fresh and the lies were still warm. My mother answered on the first ring, that maternal intuition that knew when her daughters needed her before we even spoke. "Mom, I need you to come to Chicago tonight," I said, my voice breaking for the first time. "Ryan's having an affair. I need to go to Paris. I need you to watch Emma." The silence on her end wasn't judgment or shock, but the kind of fury that mothers reserve for people who hurt their children. "I'm getting in the car now," she said. "I'll be there in 3 hours. Go get the bastard, sweetheart. But be smart about it." Emma was playing in her room, arranging her stuffed animals for tomorrow's party attendance. Each bear and rabbit had an assigned seat, a role in her birthday celebration. "Mommy has to go on a quick trip for work," I told her, kneeling to her eye level. "Grandma's coming for a sleepover surprise." She studied my face with those brown eyes that looked just like Ryan's, the one feature that would forever remind me of this betrayal. "Will you be back for my birthday?" she asked, and I pulled her close, breathing in her strawberry shampoo scent. "I promise, baby. Mommy never misses your birthday." The United Airlines ticket to Paris cost $4,000, purchased last minute in first class, because if I was going to confront my husband's infidelity, I wasn't doing it from coach. Megan met me at O'Hare, still in her pilot uniform from her incoming flight. She hugged me in the departure lounge, the kind of embrace that said everything words couldn't. In her hands was a folder she'd prepared during her layover. "I pulled some strings," she said quietly. "Their return flight is in 4 days Sunday morning. They're staying at the Four Seasons George V, the penthouse suite. The concierge is a friend from my Paris layovers. He confirmed they checked in as Mr. and Mrs. Harrison. She'd also printed photos from the plane, professional quality, despite being taken discreetly. Ryan and Isabelle tangled together in business class, sharing earbuds, her head on his shoulder, his hand covering hers on the armrest. My boss had been surprisingly understanding when I'd called. "Family emergency, international situation," I'd said, and he'd heard something in my voice that required no further explanation. "Take whatever time you need, Corinne. Your team can handle the Peterson campaign. We all have moments when life trumps work. Just come back whole." "Okay," I'd promised, though though I wasn't sure wholeness was possible after this. The overnight bag I'd packed contained the essentials for confrontation. My passport, credit cards, in my name only the jewelry my grandmother had left me, that Ryan had always called old-fashioned, but which I suddenly needed as armor. I'd added our wedding album, not from sentiment, but as evidence of what was being destroyed. The divorce lawyer's business card Amy had given me after her sister's marriage imploded was tucked in the inside pocket. She'd said it was just in case, but we both knew just in case was more like probably when. My mother had arrived while I was packing, using her key to let herself in. She'd brought war supplies disguised as grandmother love. Cookies for Emma, wine for later, tissues for the inevitable, and her lawyer's number from when Dad had left us for his secretary 25 years ago. Some men never change, she'd said, watching me fold clothes with shaking hands. They just get better at hiding it until they don't care about hiding anymore. The flight to Paris departed at 11:15 p.m., the red-eye that business travelers favored for arriving fresh in European morning. I wasn't fresh. I was fury dressed in designer clothes, betrayal wrapped in Chanel perfume, a wife transformed into something harder and more dangerous. The first-class cabin was nearly empty, just me and a few executives too absorbed in their laptops to notice the woman drinking champagne like water and studying her wedding album like evidence in a murder trial. The flight attendant whose name tag read Marie noticed my distress despite my careful makeup. "First time to Paris?" she asked gently, while refilling my glass for the third time. I laughed, the sound bitter in the pressurized cabin. 10th time, actually. But first time chasing my cheating husband. Marie didn't flinch, just patted my shoulder with the wisdom of someone who'd seen every type of passenger drama. "Paris has a way of revealing truth," she said. "The city of lights illuminates everything, especially shadows. 8 hours is a long time to think when sleep won't come." I replayed our entire marriage looking for fault lines I'd missed. When had Ryan stopped seeing me as enough? Was it after Emma was born, when my body changed from lover to mother? Was it when my agency succeeded, making my income equal to his? Or was it simply that Isabelle was younger, fresher, without the baggage of shared history and mutual disappointments? The wedding album told our story in frozen moments. Ryan crying as I walked down the aisle at the Chicago Botanic Garden. Our first dance to At Last by Etta James. Cutting the cake he'd smashed into my face, despite promising he wouldn't. The honeymoon in Paris, standing before the Eiffel Tower at sunset, promising to return every anniversary. We'd never made it back, always too busy, too committed to other things until now, when he'd returned with another woman. There was one photo I kept returning to, taken at our 5th anniversary dinner. We'd gone to that restaurant Isabelle and Ryan had visited, though I didn't know that yet. In the photo, Ryan was looking at something off-camera while I gazed at him with complete adoration. Even then, 5 years ago, was he already looking elsewhere? The timestamp on the photo read 8:43 p.m. June 15th, 5 years ago. According to the credit card statement, this June 15th, our 10th anniversary, he'd been at the same restaurant with Isabelle. The plane descended into Charles de Gaulle as sunrise painted the French countryside gold. Somewhere below, my husband was waking up with another woman, probably ordering room service in the suite he'd booked under his mother's maiden name, playing at a different life, while our daughter prepared for her birthday. The captain announced the local time 6 a.m., and the temperature 58 degrees Fahrenheit, perfect October weather for destroying a marriage. I texted my mother that I'd landed safely, texted Megan the same, and turned off my phone before Ryan's good morning message could arrive. Whatever lies he'd craft about New York meetings could wait. I had truth to find in the City of Light, and 8 hours of transatlantic fury to fuel my search. The taxi driver asked in accented English where I was going, and I showed him the Four Seasons address. "Ah," he said with Gallic knowing, special occasion. You could say that I replied, watching Paris wake up around me, beautiful and indifferent to my pain. The Four Seasons. George V stood like a testament to elegance on Avenue George V, its facade dripping with window boxes of red geraniums that seemed obscenely cheerful for such a dark morning in my life. I'd changed in the airport bathroom into what I thought of as my war uniform, a black Saint Laurent dress I'd bought for last year's company gala. The one where everyone said Ryan was lucky to have me. Now I wondered who else had thought he was lucky while planning to make him theirs. The lobby overwhelmed with its casual opulence crystal chandeliers, casting rainbows on marble floors that had probably seen 1,000 confrontations like mine. The concierge Henri recognized something in my face that required no explanation. "Madam Matthews," he asked quietly, and I realized Megan had called ahead. "Your sister is a good friend to us here. She mentioned you might need assistance. Suite 512, the penthouse. They ordered breakfast for 8:30 to be served on the terrace." 8:30. I had 2 hours to decide how to handle this, 2 hours to choose between explosive confrontation and cold precision. The hotel bar was already open, serving coffee to jet-lagged Americans and early-rising Parisians. I ordered espresso and pain au chocolat, needing sugar and caffeine for what was coming. The bartender, with that particularly French intuition for drama, poured champagne without my asking. "For courage, madame," he said with a small smile. The bubbles remind us that everything rises to the surface eventually. I'd brought props for this performance purchased at the airport duty-free, with the kind of clarity that comes from rage. A bottle of champagne identical to the one they'd shared at the gate, Krug Grande Cuvée, $300 of irony. Swiss chocolates in a heart-shaped box that looked romantic until you read what I'd had inscribed on the band, "Congratulations on your betrayal." The wedding album tucked under my arm like a weapon, its white leather cover pristine after 10 years of careful preservation. At 8:15, I made my way to the 5th floor, my heels silent on carpet thick enough to absorb screams. The hallway stretched forever, each door holding its own secrets, but only one mattered to me. 512 sat at the end double doors, suggesting the grandeur beyond. I could hear music from inside, jazz, the kind Ryan claimed to hate, but apparently enjoyed with Isabelle. The Do Not Disturb sign hung crooked as if placed hastily the night before. Henri had given me a master key card, a violation of hotel policy that Megan's friendship had purchased, but I didn't need it. At 8:25, the door opened for room service, a young man wheeling in a breakfast cart laden with enough food for a celebration. I followed him in my entrance so smooth, he didn't notice until we were both inside the suite's living room, him arranging silver covers on the terrace table, me standing in the doorway between two worlds. The suite was everything I'd expected, and worse. Roses on every surface, their scent cloying in the morning air. Champagne bottles, plural, scattered like evidence of multiple celebrations. Isabelle's lingerie draped over a chair, the La Perla tag still attached, proof of Ryan's recent purchase. The terrace doors were open, revealing a view of the Eiffel Tower that should have been romantic but felt like mockery. I heard them before I saw them, Ryan's laugh mixing with Isabelle's French accent as they discussed something about extending their stay. "Another few days in paradise," he was saying. "The firm won't miss us." "My firm won't miss me," she agreed, then giggled at some private joke. They emerged from this bedroom wrapped in matching hotel robes. The kind of coordination that suggested practice and stopped dead when they saw me. The champagne bottle in Ryan's hand fell, but didn't break $1,000 Dom Perignon rolling across marble until it hit my foot. I picked it up, examining the label with the kind of attention you give things when you can't look at faces. 2008, I observed. A good year. We got married that year, remember, Ryan? Or have you forgotten that along with your wedding vows? Isabelle spoke first, her composure cracking like ice in spring. "You said you were divorced," she hissed at Ryan, the French accent making her anger sound sophisticated. "You said the marriage ended a year ago. You said she was crazy unstable. That's why you had custody." The lies were so elaborate I almost admired them. He'd constructed an entire alternative history where he was the victim, the noble single father, the one who deserved love after suffering. Ryan's mouth opened and closed like a fish drowning in air. He reached for me, then Isabelle, then seemed to realize touching either of us would be catastrophic. "Corinne, this isn't what it looks like," he started, the cliché so predictable I laughed. The sound startled all three of us, echoing off marble and crystal, until the whole suite rang with it. "Not what it looks like?" I asked, gesturing around the romance novel setting. Then what exactly does it look like? Because from here it looks like my husband is in Paris with his mistress, while our daughter prepares for her 7th birthday party. Emma's name changed everything. Isabelle went white, her sophisticated facade crumbling. You have a daughter? She turned to Ryan with the kind of fury that comes from discovering you're not the first woman lied to. You have a child, and you're here with me. The French accent made her horror more pronounced, each word a separate accusation. You monster. You complete monster. I set the champagne I'd brought on the coffee table, along with the chocolates and our wedding album. Congratulations on your betrayal, I said, my voice steady as a newsreader's. Though it seems you've been betrayed too, Isabelle. He's quite good at it, isn't he? 10 years of practice with me and you never suspected. Though I'm curious. Ryan, how long did you plan to keep this version running? When were you going to tell her about Emma's birthday? About the penthouse in Chicago where your actual family lives? The room service waited on the terrace, getting cold, a metaphor too obvious to mention. Ryan sank onto the sofa, his head in his hands, the successful attorney reduced to a caught child. It started his friendship, he said to his hands. The merger required long hours, late nights. Isabelle understood the pressure, the ambition. You were always busy with Emma or your agency. She made me feel alive again, important, desired. Alive. As if our life together had been death, as if raising our daughter was a terminal disease he'd needed to escape. The cruelty of it should have hurt, but I felt only clarity, like seeing the solution to a puzzle you'd been working on too long. You felt dead with your family, so you created a fantasy in Paris. How very original, Ryan. How very middle-aged crisis of you. What happened next surprised everyone, most of all me. Isabelle walked to where I stood, her bare feet silent on marble, and slapped Ryan across the face with the kind of force that comes from French passion and American betrayal combined. The sound echoed through the suite like a gunshot, leaving a red mark on his cheek that matched the roses he'd bought her. Then she turned to me, tears streaming down her face, and spoke in rapid French that I somehow understood despite 3 years of high school lessons. I didn't know, she said, switching to English when she saw I was listening. I swear on my mother's grave I didn't know. He told me you were divorced, that you were unstable, that you'd abandoned Emma, that he had full custody. He showed me divorce papers. Her confession poured out like champagne from a shaken bottle. The papers were fake. I realized listening to her describe documents that didn't exist, custody arrangements that were fantasy, a version of me that was Ryan's creation. I found myself comforting my husband's mistress, the absurdity of it all making me feel like I'd entered a French farce. Isabelle was 29, brilliant, beautiful, and had been played as thoroughly as I had. She showed me text messages on her phone, Ryan painting himself as a lonely single father struggling to raise Emma alone, needing love after his wife's abandonment. The narrative was so detailed, I wondered if he'd started believing it himself. We need wine for this, Isabelle declared, and called room service for a bottle of Chablis, despite it being 8:45 in the morning. Ryan sat frozen on the sofa, watching his two worlds collide and merge into something he couldn't control. The waiter who brought the wine didn't blink at the scene, 3 people in various states of undress and distress, the French accepting drama as naturally as breathing. Isabelle poured 3 glasses, though Ryan sat untouched. She pulled out her laptop, showing me emails that revealed the depth of deception. Ryan had created an entire alternative email account complete with fake communications from divorce attorneys, custody evaluations that praised him as a father, even a restraining order against me for fictional domestic violence. The technical skill required was impressive and terrifying. He told me you attacked him, Isabelle said, scrolling through messages. That you threw dishes, threatened him, that Emma was scared of you. I thought I was saving him, giving him the love he deserved after such trauma. She laughed bitterly. I'm an attorney. I should have verified, should have checked court records. But I trusted him. I loved him. I thought I was special. You were special, I told her, surprising myself with the honesty. Special enough for him to risk everything. Our marriage, his daughter, his reputation, his career. Do you know what this will cost him when the firm finds out Brennan Hayes has a zero-tolerance policy for relationships between supervising partners and subordinates? He'll lose his partnership, Maybe his license if the fake documents constitute fraud. The color drained from Ryan's face as the implications hit him. You wouldn't, he said, finally finding his voice. Think about Emma. Think about what this would do to her. The manipulation was so transparent I laughed again. Oh, now you're thinking about Emma. Where was that concern when you boarded a plane to Paris? When you told another woman her mother was unstable? When you missed her school play last month? For what I now assume was a romantic dinner, Isabelle was typing on her phone, her fingers flying across the screen with purpose. I'm resigning, she announced. Effective immediately. I'm sending everything to Human Resources, the managing partners, the ethics committee. If I'm going down, I'm taking the truth with me. She looked at Ryan with disgust. You destroyed my career for a fantasy. I'll return the favor with reality. My phone buzzed with messages from Chicago. My mother saying Emma was asking for Daddy. Megan checking if I was okay. Amy sending heart emojis and wine glass symbols, somehow knowing without being told that my world was exploding. But there was also an email from Henri at the front desk. Madame, there is a gentleman here claiming to be Monsieur Matthew's brother, asking for the room number. Shall I send him up? Ryan didn't have a brother. I looked at him, his face now buried in his hands, and realized there might be more lies to uncover. Who's downstairs? Ryan. Another woman. A client. You're actually supposed to be with. How many stories are you juggling? He looked up, then confusion genuine for once. I don't know what you're talking about. No one knows I'm here except who Isabelle demanded. Who else is part of this charade? But before he could answer, there was a knock at the door. Not the polite tap of hotel staff, but the authoritative pound of someone who expected to be admitted. Ryan stood, then sat back down, clearly torn between answering and hiding. Isabelle, still in her robe, but somehow maintaining dignity, went to the door. The man who entered was definitely not Ryan's brother. He was older, distinguished in that way Frenchmen manage effortlessly, and his face when he saw Isabelle was pure heartbreak. Papa Isabelle gasped, and the plot twisted again. Her father looked between the three of us, taking in the scene, understanding immediately. I tracked your phone, he said in accented English. Your mother was worried when you didn't call. She thought something had happened to you. Something has happened to me, Isabelle said quietly. Papa, meet Ryan Matthews and his wife Corinne. We have a situation. Monsieur Moreau, Isabelle's father, turned out to be exactly what the situation needed: a retired French judge with no patience for American melodrama and a protective streak toward his daughter that made Ryan shrink into the sofa. He surveyed the scene with the kind of judicial assessment that had probably sent hundreds to prison, then spoke in rapid French to Isabelle, who responded with tears and gestures toward Ryan that needed no translation. Your husband, Monsieur Moreau, said to me in pristine English, has committed multiple crimes under French law. Fraud, false representation, potentially bigamy if he went through with any ceremonies here. His voice was court steady, each word a gavel strike. In France, we take seduction under false pretenses seriously. It's called abus de faiblesse, abuse of weakness. He could face prison. Prison. The word hung in the air like perfume sweet to me, suffocating to Ryan. He stood then, his attorney instincts finally kicking in. Sir, I think there's been a misunderstanding. Isabelle and I have been in a relationship, yes, but I never forced anything. She's an adult, a lawyer herself. This was consensual. The defense was so weak, even he seemed to know it, his voice trailing off as Monsieur Moreau's expression darkened. Consensual based on lies, the judge corrected. You presented yourself as divorced, available, a single father needing love. You created false documents, a federal crime in America, I believe. You transported my daughter across international borders under fraudulent circumstances. If she chooses to press charges, and I hope she does, you'll need more than your American law degree to save you. Isabelle was packing while her father lectured, throwing designer clothes into Louis Vuitton luggage with the efficiency of someone used to quick exits. Each piece she packed seemed to hurt Ryan more than the threat of prison. The lingerie he'd bought went in the trash, the jewelry he'd given her she left on the coffee table like evidence. The engagement ring I hadn't noticed before, a massive emerald surrounded by diamonds she pulled off and threw at his feet. You proposed, I asked, the absurdity making me laugh yet again. You proposed to another woman while married to me, when how the proposal story came from Isabelle, bitter in its romance. Last weekend at the top of the Eiffel Tower at sunset, tourists applauding champagne waiting at the bottom, a photographer capturing every moment. She showed me the photos on her phone, Ryan on one knee, Isabelle crying with joy. The Paris skyline glowing behind them. Last weekend. When he'd supposedly been at a conference in Detroit, sending me photos of the Renaissance Center complaining about the cold. I'd been helping Emma with her science project about butterflies' life cycles and transformation, never knowing my own life was transforming without my consent. The cruelty of the timing wasn't lost on me. While I'd been teaching our daughter about metamorphosis, Ryan had been changing into someone I'd never known. I need to make a call, I announced, pulling out my phone. The law firm of Brennan Hayes and Associates had a 24-hour emergency line for partners, and I knew the number by heart from years of Ryan's late-night crisis calls. "This is Corinne Matthews," I said when the managing partner's assistant answered. "I need to report an ethical violation involving Ryan Matthews and the potential misuse of firm resources for international fraud." Ryan lunged for my phone, but Monsieur Moreau stepped between us with the authority of someone used to controlling violent defendants. "You will sit," he commanded, and Ryan sat. The assistant was taking notes, asking questions, promising to have senior partners contact me immediately. The Chicago legal community was small gossip traveled fast, and Ryan's career was ending with each word I spoke. But I wasn't done. The next call was to our bank, freezing our joint accounts before Ryan could empty them for legal defense or escape funds. Then our investment advisor alerting him to potential fraud. The credit card companies canceling cards and requesting full transaction histories. Each call was another brick in the wall I was building between my old life and whatever came next. Isabelle finished packing and stood before Ryan, beautiful even in her pain. "I loved you," she said simply. "I gave up a position in Paris for you, believing we were building something. My parents warned me about American men, their promises, their easy lies. I thought you were different. I thought what we had was real." She turned to me then. "I'm sorry, Corinne, for everything. Woman to woman, I'm deeply sorry. If there's anything I can do to help your case, any testimony needed, I'll provide it." Her father escorted her to the door, pausing to hand me his business card. "If you need witnesses for your divorce proceedings, he said we will make ourselves available. What he did to my daughter and to you is unforgivable. Men like him, they don't change. They just find new victims. Take everything he has, Madam Matthews. It's the only language they understand." After they left, Ryan and I were alone for the first time since this started. The suite felt smaller without Isabelle's fury and her father's authority. The breakfast on the terrace had long gone cold, 500 euros of waste that seemed symbolic. Ryan looked older, defeated, the confident attorney replaced by a middle-aged man who'd gambled everything on excitement and lost. Why, I asked the simple question containing multitudes. We had everything, Ryan. A beautiful daughter, successful careers, the penthouse friends, family who loved us. Why wasn't it enough? He looked at me, then really looked at me for the first time in months, maybe years. "Because it was ordinary," he said quietly. "Because every day was the same. Because I looked at my life at 40 and saw 40 more years of exactly this, and I panicked. So you destroyed it all for what, 5 months of hotel rooms and lies? The math doesn't work, Ryan. You traded a lifetime for a season. You exchanged Emma's stability for Isabelle's excitement. You threw away your career for Instagram moments at the Eiffel Tower. Was the panic worth the devastation? His silence was answer enough. The kind of silence that fills courtrooms when verdicts are read. The flight back to Chicago felt like swimming up from deep water each mile toward home, bringing more oxygen to lungs that had forgotten how to breathe. I'd left Ryan in the suite with the wreckage of his choices, his return flight already canceled by my efficient assistance in destroying his life. He'd have to book a new ticket with a credit card I hadn't frozen if any existed, and face whatever waited for him in Chicago alone. Emma's birthday party was in 6 hours. I'd promised her I'd be there, and unlike her father, I kept my promises. The flight attendant, different from Marie but equally intuitive, kept my wine glass full and my tissues stocked. The woman next to me, heading home from her own Paris adventure, noticed my wedding ring that I was still wearing and the wedding album I'd retrieved from Ryan's suite. "Renewal ceremony," she asked kindly, and I laughed so hard people turned to stare. "More like a funeral," I said, then explained because sometimes strangers on planes are the best therapists. She listened to the whole sordid story, occasionally gasping or clutching her pearls. A Southern woman with strong opinions about men who stray. By the time we landed, she'd given me her divorce lawyer's number, her therapist's contact, and a hug that felt like maternal blessing. My mother met me at O'Hare, Emma asleep in the back of her Lexus despite the afternoon sun. "She's been asking for both of you all day," Mom said quietly. "I told her you were getting her special present, and Daddy was stuck in a meeting. She bought it because 7-year-olds still believe adults tell the truth." The weight of that innocence felt heavier than my luggage. The designer bags I'd packed with such fury, now just containers of cloth and consequence. The drive home was silent except for Emma's soft snoring and the city sounds that had become the soundtrack of my life. Chicago looked different now, sharper somehow, as if Betrayal had adjusted my focal length. The penthouse building rose before us, 23 floors of luxury that now felt like a prison I'd been released from without requesting parole. Emma woke as we parked, her face lighting up when she saw me. "Mommy, you're back. Is Daddy with you? Did you get my special surprise?" The lie came easily, necessarily protectively. "Daddy had to stay in his meeting, sweetheart, but he'll see you tomorrow. And yes, I got your surprise. It's going to be the best birthday ever." She believed me because I was her mother, her constant, her truth-teller, even when truth became fiction to protect her world a little longer. The party was in 3 hours. The cake I'd abandoned sat finished on the counter, my mother having completed the decorating with grandmother precision. The Princess Castle was perfect pink towers, reaching toward dreams that still seemed possible in a 7-year-old's world. The guests would arrive expecting Ryan's charm and my organization the power couple they'd known for years. Instead, they'd get me alone holding it together with wine and willpower. I called my lawyer, not Howard, from the card in my wallet, but Jennifer Krause, the one who'd handled Amy's sister's divorce and left the ex-husband living in a studio apartment Googling ramen recipes. "Jennifer," I said when she answered, "I need you to file emergency papers. My husband's in Paris with his mistress, there's documented fraud, and I want to bury him legally before he lands." She laughed, the sound sharp as a legal brief. "I love a good Friday afternoon massacre. Send me everything." While Emma dressed in her birthday princess gown, I forwarded Jennifer the photos, emails, bank statements, credit card records, the whole digital trail of Ryan's destruction. Isabelle had also sent her evidence, woman-to-woman solidarity crossing oceans in seconds. The fake divorce papers Ryan had created were particularly damning, showing intent to defraud that would play badly in court and worse in the court of public opinion. My phone rang constantly. Ryan from various airport phones, leaving voicemails that progressed from angry to pleading to desperate. The managing partner from his firm professionally informing me that Ryan had been suspended pending investigation. Mutual friends who'd seen something on social media. Though I hadn't posted anything yet, the Chicago legal gossip mill more efficient than any Facebook algorithm. Emma's party guests arrived in waves, 25 children and their parents filling our penthouse with chaos that felt like comfort. "Where's Ryan?" became a chorus. I answered with variations of work emergency unavoidable, meeting international crisis. The mothers exchanged glances that said they knew something was wrong, but the party continued with the momentum of planned joy magicians and face painters and games that required no father to succeed. During the cake cutting, Emma whispered her wish loud enough for everyone to hear. "I wish Daddy was here," and the room went silent in that way that happens when children accidentally speak adult truths. "He wishes he could be here too," I said, lighting her candles with hands that barely shook. "Now make a better wish, sweetheart. One that can actually come true." She closed her eyes, wished silently this time, and blew out 7 candles plus 1 for luck. though luck had already left our family. The party ended with parents collecting sugar-crashed children and offering subtle support. "If you need anything," they said. "We're here for you," they promised. The kids had no idea, they assured. But I saw the questions in their eyes, the mental calculations of whose side to take when the explosion became public. Most would choose me, the wronged wife, but some would find Ryan's attention flattering enough to forgive his sins, especially once he was single and looking for his next Isabelle. Emma fell asleep in her princess dress. Chocolate cake smeared on her face like war paint from a battle she didn't know she was fighting. I sat on her bed watching her breathe this perfect creation from an imperfect marriage. Tomorrow I'd have to tell her something, create a narrative that protected her innocence while acknowledging Daddy's absence. But tonight she was still 7, still believed in happily ever after. Still thought parents were superheroes who never failed. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown French number. "Isabelle, I wanted you to know I'm back in Paris. I've withdrawn my resignation and instead filed a formal complaint with the firm about Ryan's misconduct. My father is helping me build a case for fraud. I'm also pregnant. 10 weeks. I don't know what to do." The last line hit like lightning, illuminating a landscape I thought I'd already seen clearly. Ryan was going to be a father again, just not with me. 6 months later, I sat in the conference room of Brennan Hayes and Associates, though Ryan no longer worked there. He'd been terminated with cause his partnership dissolved, his name removed from the letterhead like he'd never existed. The firm had called this meeting to discuss the final settlement, the corporate equivalent of salting earth where something toxic once grew. Across the table sat Ryan, diminished in every way. The designer suits had been replaced with department store basics. The confidence that once commanded rooms had evaporated, leaving a man who looked every one of his 40 years plus 10 more for interest. His lawyer, a public defender friend doing him a favor, shuffled papers nervously, while Jennifer, my attorney, sat like a queen surveying conquered territory. The terms were non-negotiable. I got the penthouse purchased primarily with my inheritance from my grandmother. I got 70% of all assets, the maximum Illinois law allowed, given the documented fraud. Emma remained in my full custody with supervised visitation for Ryan every other Sunday. He'd pay child support and half of Emma's education costs through graduate school. The French charges had been dropped after Isabelle decided she didn't want the drama, but the threat remained like a sword over his head. About Isabelle's pregnancy, Jennifer said, sliding a document across the table. "My client wants it stated that she has no obligation toward this child, financial or otherwise. Ryan's problem, not hers." Ryan's hand shook as he signed each signature, another nail in the coffin of his former life. Isabelle had returned to Paris permanently. Her baby due in 3 months, a little boy she'd already named Henri, after her father who'd stood by her through the humiliation. Emma knew Daddy lived somewhere else now because Mommy and Daddy couldn't be friends anymore. The simplified truth seemed to satisfy her 7-year-old understanding of the world, though she'd asked if it was her fault if she'd been bad if Daddy left because she'd spilled juice on his laptop that one time. The child psychologist said this was normal, that children always blame themselves for adult failures, that time would help her understand it had nothing to do with her and everything to do with choices made before she was born. The meeting ended with property transfers and account closures. The business of dissolving a marriage, as mundane as its beginning, had been magical. Ryan stood to leave, then turned back, looking at me with eyes that might have shown genuine remorse if I still cared to look for it. "I'm sorry, Corinne. For everything. For Emma. For destroying what we built. For Isabelle and the baby and the chaos. I'm so sorry." Sorry was a word that meant nothing now, like a currency from a country that no longer existed. "Tell Emma you're sorry," I said. "Every other Sunday when you see her. Tell her you're sorry you missed her birthday for a woman you'd known 4 months. Tell her you're sorry when she asks why you don't live with us anymore. Tell her you're sorry when she's 16 and doesn't want to visit because her friends are more important than a father who wasn't there. Save your sorries for someone who still needs them." I walked out first, Jennifer beside me like a protective detail, leaving Ryan in the conference room, where he'd once made partner, where he'd celebrated victories that seemed important before he'd thrown them away for French lingerie and Eiffel Tower proposals. The elevator down felt like ascending each floor we dropped, lifting weight from shoulders I hadn't realized were carrying so much. A year later, Emma and I were different people living in the same space made new. The penthouse had been renovated, Ryan's office becoming an art studio where Emma painted butterflies, and I learned watercolors were forgiving in ways people weren't. His clothes had been donated to charity, his photos stored in boxes Emma could access when she was older and wanted to understand her history. I'd been promoted to Chief Creative Officer partly from sympathy, but mostly because I was brilliant at my job when not managing Ryan's ego. The campaigns I created won awards, the clients I cultivated brought millions to the agency, and the team I led followed me with the loyalty that comes from watching someone rise from ashes they didn't create but had to clean up anyway. Megan visited monthly, her pilot privileges making Chicago an easy stop. She'd been promoted to captain, the youngest woman in United's history to fly the Paris route. A bitter irony we toasted with champagne that didn't hurt to drink anymore. She was dating a French air traffic controller, someone she'd met not through deception, but through honest collision, their planes and lives intersecting without lies to navigate around. James entered our lives through Emma's school, a widowed father whose son Benjamin was in her class. His wife had died of cancer 3 years ago, a tragedy that made my betrayal seem small by comparison. We bonded over single-parent exhaustion, school pickup logistics, and the way children could make you laugh even when you wanted to cry. He didn't push, didn't assume, just existed in our orbit until existing together seemed natural as breathing. The first time he kissed me a year and a half after Paris, I thought about Ryan. Not with longing, but with gratitude for the contrast. James's kiss was patient, asking permission even as it was happening, leaving room for retreat if I needed it. Ryan had always kissed like he was conquering territory. James kissed like he was grateful for the visit and would be happy to be invited back, but understood if I needed time to consider. Emma loved James because he taught her soccer and never let her win, treating her like an athlete instead of a fragile thing that might break. She loved Benjamin because he shared his Pokemon cards and didn't care that she was better at math. Watching them play, I saw the possibility of family that wasn't about blood or law, but about choosing to show up consistently, deliberately, honestly. Ryan met Isabelle's baby during a complicated visit to Chicago that involved lawyers and diplomatic negotiations. The boy looked nothing like Emma had as a baby, taking after his French grandfather with dark hair and serious eyes. Ryan held him awkwardly, this son he'd created in Betrayal, while Emma asked if the baby was her brother. Half-brother Ryan explained, launching into a genetics lesson until she got bored and went to play with her iPad. The baby's name was Philippe, after Isabelle's grandfather, no trace of Ryan in his identity. Isabelle had found work with an international firm, raising her son alone with the help of parents who'd forgiven her poor judgment in men, but not the man himself. She sent me a Christmas card that year, a photo of Philippe in front of their tree with a note that said simply, "Thank you for your grace in chaos." We survived him. Survived. It was the right word for what we'd done, Isabelle and Emma and I, 3 females, connected by one man's inability to find happiness without destroying everyone else's. But survival implied barely making it, and we'd done more than that. We'd thrived each in our own way, building lives that didn't need Ryan's validation or presence to feel complete. The final paperwork came through on a Tuesday, the divorce decree arriving by courier, like an invitation to a party I'd already attended. I signed where indicated, sent it back, and felt nothing but mild relief, like finally finishing a book that had stopped being interesting chapters ago. The marriage was over legally now, but it had ended in that hotel suite in Paris, maybe even before, when Ryan had decided ordinary love wasn't enough. That evening, making dinner while Emma did homework and Rain painted the windows, my phone rang. It was Ryan calling from his studio apartment where he lived with furniture from IKEA, and dreams that had downsized to match his circumstances. "Can I talk to Emma?" he asked, his voice smaller than it used to be when he commanded courtrooms. "She's doing homework," I said. "Call during your scheduled time Sunday." "Please, Corinne," he said, and something in his voice made me pause. "What's wrong, Ryan?" There was silence, then a confession. "Isabelle won't let me see Philippe. She says I'm toxic, that she doesn't want her son growing up thinking it's okay to treat women the way I treated you both. I'm losing everything, Corinne. My son, my daughter, my career, my purpose. I don't know how to fix this." The man who'd once had all the answers was asking me for help, the irony so rich it could have funded a small nation. "You can't fix it, Ryan. Some things once broken stay broken. You can only move forward, be better, show Emma and Philippe through actions, not words, that you're worth their time. It takes years to rebuild trust you destroyed in months. Start small. Show up when you say you will. Remember birthdays without reminders. Pay support without court orders. Be boring, Ryan. Be consistent. Be the ordinary you were so afraid of becoming." "But I love the excitement," he said, sounding like a child explaining why he'd eaten all the candy. "Excitement is just adrenaline, and adrenaline fades. What remains when the excitement ends? Look at your life now. Was it worth it?" His silence was answer enough, the kind that fills spaces when truth is too heavy for words. I hung up without saying goodbye, returning to my ordinary life of homework and dinner and bedtime stories that were worth more than all the excitement in Paris. Emma looked up from her math problems, those brown eyes that reminded me of Ryan when he'd been someone worth loving. "Was that Daddy?" she asked. "Yes, sweetheart, but he'll call Sunday like always." She nodded, returning to division problems that had clear answers, unlike the multiplication of pain adults created with their choices. "Mom," she said without looking up, "I'm glad you didn't go away too. Some kids have no parents home. I have one good one. That's enough. One good one. That's enough." From the mouth of a 7-year-old came wisdom it had taken me 36 years to learn. You didn't need perfect. You didn't need excitement. You didn't need Paris proposals or business class to happiness. You needed one good thing, one true thing, one thing that showed up consistently without fanfare or drama. The ordinary I'd built from extraordinary wreckage was enough. More than enough. It was everything. The rain stopped and Chicago sparkled outside our windows like its own city of light. Emma finished her homework, I finished dinner, and we sat together eating pasta with butter because sometimes simple was perfect. She told me about Benjamin's new dog, about the science project on butterflies getting an A, about how Ms. Patterson said she had real talent in art. I listened with the attention I used to divide between her and Ryan's stories, now all hers, undiluted and complete. That night after Emma was asleep, I stood on our terrace looking at the city lights reflected in Lake Michigan. Somewhere out there, Ryan was probably alone in his studio, maybe looking at the same view from a lesser height. Somewhere in Paris, Isabelle was probably nursing Philippe through another sleepless night. And here I was, neither alone nor partnered, neither broken nor completely healed, but standing on my own feet on my own terrace of my own life. My phone buzzed with a text from James. "How was your day?" Simple question, honest interest, no agenda beyond connection. "It was good," I replied. "Ordinary in the best way. How was yours?" And so began another conversation that might lead somewhere or nowhere, but was honest in its intention, clear in its communication, and free from the weight of deception that had once defined my marriage. The city hummed below 23 floors down, where life continued in all its messy complexity. Above, stars were invisible behind light pollution, but I knew they were there, constant despite clouds, reliable in ways people rarely were. Emma coughed in her sleep, and I went to check on her, pulling her blanket higher, kissing her forehead, whispering promises I could keep. "I'm here. I'll always be here. You're safe. You're loved. You're enough." The birthday cake from that awful day still lived in our freezer, preserved like evidence, though the case was closed. I pulled it out, this princess castle I'd decorated, while my marriage collapsed an ocean away, and threw it in the garbage with the violence it deserved. The sound of it hitting the bin was satisfying, final, the last piece of that day disposed of properly. Tomorrow I'd bake Emma a new cake, just because no birthday required celebrating, nothing but Tuesday and survival and the quiet joy of ordinary life. When you tell people your husband left you for a younger woman he met at work, they assume you're bitter broken, destined for cats and wine, and bitter comments at other people's weddings. They don't expect you to laugh to thrive to send his mistress support when she's raising his baby alone. They don't expect you to date again carefully but optimistically. They don't expect your daughter to be okay resilient in ways that make you proud and sad simultaneously. They expect tragedy, and when you give them triumph, they don't quite know what to do with it. So where are you watching from today? Have you ever had your world shattered by someone you trusted completely? Have you rebuilt from ruins you didn't create? Comment below with your own stories of betrayal and recovery. Like this video if it resonated with your experience. Subscribe to hear more stories of women who refused to be destroyed by men who couldn't honor their promises. And share this with someone who needs to hear that the end of a marriage isn't the end of a life. Sometimes it's the beginning of something better. Thank you for witnessing my journey from that phone call in Chicago to where I stand today. May your betrayals become blessings in disguise. May your ordinary moments be more valuable than someone else's excitement. And may you find the courage to choose yourself when someone else chooses to leave. Remember, you don't need perfect. You don't need Paris. You just need one good person who shows up, and sometimes that person is yourself.